This week, President Obama announced the deployment of 17,000 more U.S. troops to Afghanistan.
I think Afghanistan is still winnable in the sense of our ability to ensure that it is not a launching pad for attacks against North America. I think it's still possible for us to stamp out al-Qaeda, to make sure that extremism is not expanding, but it rather is contracting. I think all those goals are still possible.
If the U.S. is to achieve these goals, many believe that it will need the help of regional powers, including Russia. A recent decision by Kyrgyzstan to close its U.S. airbase, a central access point for U.S. NATO troops and supplies, combined with the Taliban's expanding control over the route between Pakistan and Afghanistan, have increased Russia's importance to the U.S. NATO mission. Russia also happens to be the last country to have occupied Afghanistan, and as such has its own analysis regarding the roots and realities of the situation, an analysis it has been broadcasting in recent days over its state-sponsored English-language television network, Russia Today.
1979. The country was in chaos. Afghanistan's pro-Soviet government was trying to contain a revolt by religious rebels known as the Mujahideen. Help from the Soviet Union was requested, and the USSR wanted to protect its influence in the region. What began as trepid assistance became a full-blown war, one that would go on for 9 years. The U.S., who felt it was losing its grip on the region, was brewing a policy to promote radical Islamist and anti-communist forces. By raising the political and military cost of the war in Afghanistan for the USSR, the U.S. hoped it would gain the upper hand in the Cold War.
If the U.S. didn't support the Mujahideen regime, none of it would have happened.
But that was the U.S. plan, a trap codenamed Operation Cyclone, funded by the CIA and designed to draw the USSR into an expensive and distracting Vietnam-like war. 20 years since the end of the Soviet-Afghan War, the U.S. now finds itself fighting against the very movement it helped arm.
In the Soviet times, in Afghanistan, our troops controlled almost 90% of the territory, not only the major cities. And Najibullah was not the mayor of Kabul, as Karzai is right now. And in the Soviet times, in '84, the poppy crop was 240 tons compared to 8,200 tons now. So that was the major difference. And like NATO, we were constructing, not destroying. And another major difference, why there were so many casualties on the Soviet side, because we didn't use air bombardment.
Real News senior editor Paul Jay sat down with former senior CIA analyst Ray McGovern, who helped prepare daily intelligence briefings for Presidents Reagan and Bush 1, to get his reaction to the Russia Today coverage.
So the Russians are saying, essentially, the American trap created the conditions for the mess that there is now. And I guess this is part of the whole blowback theory we've heard from Chalmers Johnson and others. What do you make of the Russian version of events?
Well, I can understand how they feel. They were mousetrapped. And it was before Reagan. It was Brzezinski, it was Gates, it was those folks that were so anti-communist that they wanted to get the Soviet Union embroiled in a Vietnam-type conflict so that they could not prevail like nobody prevails in Vietnam-type conflicts, and that it could contribute to the Soviet Union's problems. And in a sense, they were right. In a sense, they were right, because that was one of the contributing factors of the overextension of the Soviet Union, why it imploded during Gorbachev. It also comes out of a Eurocentric sort of point of view, where Brzezinski, has said explicitly, who cares about what happens to these brown Afghans, when the prize is in Europe and the Soviet Union is going to fall because of all this, and it is kind of a racist sort of attitude. Now, of course, when Reagan came in with Bill Casey, the consummate anti-communist, then we were really going to get these guys. That's when we recruited, the likes of Osama bin Laden to go in there and gave them Stinger missiles to shoot down Russian planes. And that's where the CIA got involved in this incredibly complicated and expensive covert action, okay? And of course, we prevailed because the Russians had to leave. But of course, we left and left the country a shambles.
And not only Afghanistan left a shambles, it changed to quite, as I understand it, it changed much of the character of Pakistan. Pakistan, which became the base for the Afghan war, weapons going this way, drugs coming this way. It's been described to me as a country turned into a Kalashnikov culture. That in Pakistan, everyone, especially in the rural areas, everyone wound up having a Kalashnikov under their bed. So how much is this current mess where you have not just the Afghan crisis, but Pakistan with nuclear weapons, and having, in the midst of terrible economic troubles, the economic crisis has affected Pakistan very severely. Is so much of the roots of this in this alliance with jihadists to achieve American policy aims?
It's highly ironic, isn't it? It was very myopic, wasn't it? But that's the way Brzezinski looked at the world and continues to look at it. He conceives it as a big success. All we have are weapons floating around like nobody's business. So we just learned the Government Accountability Office says that 87,000 weapons that were given to the Afghan army and police, we don't know where they ended up, 87,000. We know from August of '07 that 190,000 Kalashnikovs given to Iraq have disappeared or can't be tracked. So where all these things go, they go to the people that you just mentioned, the people that we kind of inspirited with the notion that, you know, might makes right, and you just kind of do what you have to do. And a lot of those are rabid Muslim extremists. A lot of them are extremists of other hue. But that's what Zardari and the other Pakistani authorities have to deal with now, and it's largely our fault.
The argument in favor of sending troops to Afghanistan right now would be, well, you're trying to make all these diplomatic moves. You have to do something to, quote unquote, stabilize the situation for now, which means protect Kabul and send a signal that the Americans are committed to on-the-ground military operation there. Is there anything to this argument?
My military specialists tell me there's nothing to that argument, that Kabul is safe for the nonce, that if we get together with NATO in April, as we are scheduled to, and decide on a different kind of policy, that will be the crucible. You don't preempt smart policy making by sending more troops in. The only rational reason for the surge in Iraq was to prevent a loss of Iraq during the administration of Bush and Cheney. That was the only reason, okay?
In the interview I showed you earlier from Khrushchev, not the Khrushchev, he kept repeating, the Russians, we built stuff. Yeah. And if you talk to Afghans now, they compare the Russian occupation to the American occupation. And they, according to their report, which might be self-serving, that people say, well, the Russians built things. The Americans aren't building anything.
The Russians went in there not to build stuff. I mean, they went in there because the Russians have always been, historically, very sensitive to what happens on their southern soft underbelly, okay? And Afghanistan is right there, okay? And they couldn't abide what was going to happen there. And so they saw us behind that, and they said, well, this is our, what they call blizu zagranice, our near frontier, and they were going to do that. And we knew they were going to do it. That's why we mousetrapped them, okay? So that's why they were in Afghanistan. It wasn't to build roads. Right?
But they did, in fact, build stuff. Well, intent or not intent, they actually did build. I've been there. You can see all the bridges and roads. And
they did, and so have we. And we built a big road, you know, but little else. And mostly we've been destroying things. So it's a fair point, but it's, you know, it's gilding the lily a little bit to say that the Russians behaved much more decently than we did.
Donate today and receive a new documentary film available to members of the Real News Network. The History of the National Security State with legendary author Gore Vidal. Bonus features of the DVD include an in-depth response to Vidal from ex-CIA analyst Ray McGovern, who served under 7 U.S. presidents, an exclusive interview with Colin Powell's former Chief of Staff Larry Wilkerson, and an insightful interview with oil policy analyst Antonia Juhas.
The news magazine of the screen. Living glimpses of history in the making.
Hollywood and Washington is a symbiotic relationship. They both deal with illusions. Reality doesn't often play much of a part. I think I saw through the myth of the Cold War almost from the beginning. I was a Washington political kid from a political family. Roosevelt first had radio because he had this great speaking voice and everyone liked to hear. Truman proceeded to break every arrangement that Roosevelt had set up for a peaceful coexistence. And Truman thought that it would be a good idea. Why not just stay armed all the time? And then he devised the national security state. You've got to go up and swear allegiance to the United States or else you're a commie. I mean, we had imported fascism. We get Dwight Eisenhower, who said that we have this great military industrial complex. It is a dangerous thing. And he said this is going to change everything. And the way our country is governed is going to change us politically. Along comes Jack Kennedy, who wanted to make his mark, believed in the Cold War. But he said, in this kind of politics, it is the appearance of things that matters. I think everybody should take a sober look at the world about us. The national security state still exists, only it isn't communism anymore, it's terrorism. This is the most serious thing that has happened in the history of the United States. Knowledge is power. We need an honest news system.
We need the real news.
This is the sort of thing we can build right now without anyone else's permission from the government or from the business community. It's the powers in our hands.
If we're not going to sleepwalk into more wars, we think we need to start with a television news network that won't bow to pressure and has the courage to seek facts. And that means independent economics. And that's why we need you.
Make a tax-deductible donation now of at least $10 a month or a one-time give of at least $75. As a thank you for your support, we will send you the new documentary film, The History of the National Security State.